Can I tilt it down a little bit? Huh?
I looked at the sign again. Guardians.
Okay.
So are you available to go at 10 on Thursday? Well, then we're going to go at 10 on Thursday. Well, probably earlier than that because we want a good start.
Go ahead.
Or at least.
Thank you.
You mind putting me into the,
Yeah, I'll do that.
Oh.
That's the next thing I gotta do. Chris, could you do me a big favor and lower the blinds for me and get all of them? Thank you. Thanks, Marissa.
All right.
All the forecast knowledge you get. Everything.
Take it to the bank, Jase.
Is the invite sent out?
Yeah.
Oh, there it is.
You don't see it, I can invite you.
I got it.
Yes.
Yes. Somebody moved the chair, so I figured that.
There's definitely sound coming out.
I thought it would be good enough for him.
Everything's back up a little bit slow, so hopefully nothing dies.
Yeah. All right. Can you just double check on
You get your model. You need a equal to.
Sure. I'll pull up a couple other things.
The cruddy part about this is it doesn't store bookmarks because the computer's frozen.
What? Oh.
That's so. I always have to do this.
Is it this one?
Sorry, as long as it's moving.
Yeah. You can start off that.
Yeah. This morning they were like taking out chunks. Oh, I like that shot where you can take a whole trunk.
Okay. You guys.
Yeah, we're ready to go.
Okay.
Want a chair or something?
Yeah, do you want to?
I can sit.
Oh no, you got Okay. Sorry about the slight delay. The laptop's being extremely slow today. I'm happy to announce that Jase Bernhardt is back for another weather briefing, and probably the most active one. I think I said that last week, but probably the most active weather period we've had so far. So please be willing to engage if you have questions, even during the talk. But Jase is going to lead us today. Thanks, Jase.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks to everyone taking time out of a really nice day to sit inside and talk about what's going on outside. So if we can get this, there we go. So it's at the last stand of the nice weather. So a few pictures I took from travels over the last few days in this beautiful setup. You can see the nice State College radar tower there on the left from Blackman State Park, and then some nice jet contrails on the right there, sort of the first harbinger of the warm air advection and that warm air moving in.
Is that a vortex? I'm sorry.
Chemtrails? I thought that's what you were going to ask.
I think it's the polar vortex.
And then here's Mount Indy last night, really nice sunset and the last gasp of the foliage as well. Right, so let's just talk about what's been happening so far in 2014. I fashion myself as a climate person in the geography department. Let's talk about the climate's been so far quickly before we get into the current and future. So obviously, here's just a nice little data table of what's been going on this year in State College. Obviously, the really cold winter, big negative temperature departures, and pretty dry with those cold months as well, typically, which makes sense. Colder air, less moisture. Warmed up a bit and got wet there in the spring and early summer. Then we flipped to that. Then we dried out in June and were warm. Then we flipped to that cool and wet part of the summer. Warm in September, a little warm here in October. But overall, we still have that solid deficit of around 1.5 degrees, depending on how you average out the data so far here in State College. And we are running a slight surplus in precipitation, but that'll get ground down a little bit with a dryish October. And here's just in graph form what's happened so far with the monthly data, the red line being normal, the blue line being average, what we've actually had. And you can see we've generally resided below normal most months here, and precip is kind of flat back and forth. From what I'm looking at, it looks like we're on track to be the coldest State College year since '96, so 18 years, that's somewhat notable, I think. Kind of on par with cold early to mid 90s years, 92, 94, 96, kind of every other year during that period we had fairly cold years, degree or two below normal. Interesting to note that after each of those years, the next year is also below normal, so maybe that can tell us something about 2015 that will kind of stay at or below normal conditions. And just thinking about why it's been cold this year and those other years, just the really simple physical reasoning. If we look at our reanalysis data of the 500 millibar height anomalies, on the top left here we see what's been going on the first 6 months of this year. And generally below normal heights here from State College off towards the north and west, and above normal heights there out in the west United States into the eastern Pacific. And we can compare the pattern there we've seen this year with what we saw during those cold early mid-90s years, 92, 94, 96 there on the bottom right. And you can see sort of the same setup, generally ridge in the west, trough in the east. Everything seemed to be shifted a little more east to those years. So we got pretty cool here because those low heights and that trough is more often than not maybe centered over the northeast. Yeah, so we'll see how things evolve here into the winter, but certainly looking like one of the coldest years in a good bit of time here in State College. And one other interesting metric I looked at yesterday, obviously we haven't had any 90-degree days this year officially at State College. We have 9 days so far below zero, and that has a stark contrast from normal. Normally we see about twice as many 90-degree days as below zero days, 7 to 8 90-degree days, about 3 below zero days. So we've actually had 9 more cold days below zero than hot days 90 degrees. That's actually the second largest gap of all time here in State College going back to the 1890s. And maybe if we get a few really cold late December days, we could reach that record. So here's just a fun little graph. Each year, how many 90-degree days we've had, minus how many below zero days we've had. So almost every year you can see we're positive, so more really hot days and really cold days if we use 90 and 0 Fahrenheit as our metrics there. But a few years we've had more those cold below zero days and those hot 90-degree days. And you can see us at the end here, 2014, basically down as far as we've ever been before. So it's been an interesting year climatically, I think, and certainly cold and certainly kind of different than what we've seen here during the past decade or 15 years with generally above normal temperatures and some 90-degree days and not as many cold days. We've really flipped that script this year, it seems like. Of course, today, cold isn't the right word to be thinking about. It's probably a top 5 day of the year. If you were to take your top 5 days this year in State College in terms of weather, probably have to put this on it. So yeah, so why are you inside right now? Then of course our FROPA and maybe period of rain with it tonight. Should get some measurable precipitation. As expected, a cooling trend behind the front, although not too bad here at first. And then depending on how much you want to buy into the models, we get a nice trough and clipper type system with it later Friday into the early part of Saturday. And then that leaves us a very troughy day Saturday, very cold, breezy, raw sort of day. Maybe some types of showers mixing around. And then a warming trend again into Sunday and early next week. And it seems like we're sort of on this weekly pattern here where Tuesday, Wednesday, midweek, we get a frontal passage. So that's happened the last few weeks, and we kind of could see that again coming up here where we warm up behind the trough Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and then maybe another frontal passage roughly this time next week into the middle of the work week. So let's look at some fun stuff here.
Go to.
Yeah, of course. So we didn't quite have time to get all the maps up with the technical problems, but we'll try to get everything up here quickly. And just look at our visible first, which always gives us a good idea of what's going on. We can clearly see our frontal system here demarcated very well, and just some high and mid-level clouds generally out in front of that system with the strong warm air advection coming in out ahead of the system. And of course the parent low here spinning around in the upper Midwest and south central Canada. You can also take a look at the water vapor imagery over the U.S. as well. And we can see we're not really tapping into that Gulf of Mexico moisture. If you look at this map, if anything, some Pacific moisture feeding in. So maybe that's why we're not expecting a ton of heavy precipitation with this. Just that quick round of showers and embedded heavier rain. And especially west of here, the threat of thunderstorms. If we look at the SPC guidelines, we can still actually think about that later in this year because they have us, City College and just to the west, in a slight risk of severe weather. And it looks like the main threat, of course, would just be some gusty winds with that. Tornado threat is non-existent, maybe some hail. So especially west of here, generally a heavy thunder shower. If you look at the model trends and just what we know about what goes on here, given the timing of the front and the terrain, we wouldn't expect thunderstorms maybe this far east, but off to the west, maybe a few stronger ones as we head through the late afternoon and especially early evening. Looking at what's going on at the mesoscale, really not much in the way of Cape yet to speak of here, a little bit bubbling up there in Ohio and western Pennsylvania. Now maybe that'll start to strengthen these storms a little bit. And no wind shear really to speak of here, a little bit close to the front, so obviously not a tornado or supercell threat at all. And precipitable water, PWATs are pretty low generally, so not expecting a ton of heavy rain. And if the terrain can knock down these storms, we may not necessarily see much of anything here in terms of precipitation. So if we look at probably the best short-term guidance, is of course the HRRR. It gives us a pretty good idea of the timing and strength of this. If we look at the simulated radar, you can see it has a good handle on the showers and embedded thunderstorms with the frontal passage. And as we see, of course, as we start to lose a bit of that daytime heating and instability as the sun sets here and later in the afternoon and the showers and storms hit the terrain, the model tends to weaken the showers and storms, and we just barely maybe get clipped by it during its first pass here, 7, 8 o'clock. And maybe our best threat of showers and storms would be the actual frontal passage through late evening and the early morning hours, but the HRR is really not terribly optimistic with lots of heavy precipitation here. It tries to weaken things as it comes in. Maybe overnight we get the secondary batch of more just light to moderate rain period here. So the overnight, but everything is fairly progressive as well. So it leaves us with a pretty nice Wednesday. We should have the latest GFS model run in, and that generally confirms the higher resolution thinking that the cold front moves through and brings us to precipitation shot here starting a little after sunset into the early overnight. And then it tries to be progressive with it, leaving us with clearing skies, improving conditions, and of course cooler temperatures tomorrow. Not much of a diurnal range like we saw today, maybe only a slight bump of temperatures around midday, and then they slide back again as we have clearly much colder air aloft coming in and colder advection as those lower thicknesses move in. But should get a pretty nice Thursday. And then, of course, all attention turns to the end of the week and the Halloween and weekend period as the GFS run fashions a megatrough of sorts building in here through the northeast, bringing maybe even some of the white stuff with it.
Don't let the media get a hold of Megatron.
But if you actually look at this latest GFS run, it really dives the trough very far south, and the vorticity maximum actually spins into the Appalachians and Carolinas even. So if that were to be the case, maybe most of the precipitation is displaced to the south here. That's what the GFS wants to do with it. Then, of course, spins up a little coastal storm once that energy goes offshore. But since the trough drives so far south and east, that you can see that coastal area is well offshore and doesn't bother us at all. So certainly, if the GFS is to be believed, and we look at the European, which is in this same general mindset, this kind of clipper system of sorts starts to bubble up here in south central Canada, combines with this little bit of energy here further south over the Midwest, and as the trough deepens and we pick up moisture off the lakes, we start to get threats of precipitation here into western central Pennsylvania come late Friday evening into the overnight period Friday. With that cold air rushing in with the trough, maybe we're cold enough to mix in a few snowflakes with the shower activity. But again, if this latest GFS is to be believed, the energy actually pushes really far south. So Saturday remains relatively dry. Obviously, lots of clouds around that northwest flow and that really cold air aloft, and maybe even some terrain-enhanced and lake-enhanced showers and snow showers around, but nothing too bad Saturday as we just stay cold and blustery and lots of clouds. But then things improve Sunday as that storm pulls offshore and we start to get into high pressure and more sunshine and slowly warming conditions back closer to normal. Then actually maybe Monday we get a really nice day here as we get that high pressure again sliding offshore. We get into a bit of that southwesterly flow, obviously not nearly as strong as today, but some sort of warm air advection Monday into Tuesday. Then potentially another storm system tries to start working in here Tuesday night and maybe more likely Wednesday, as the timing on that seems to be slowing down. In the Euro, this is still a 0-Z run, but it has the same general idea as the GFS. A little slower in timing, pushing the shower and heavier rain activity through overnight. A little slower, so maybe keeping lots of clouds and shower threats, especially east of here, through the first part of Wednesday, but then we clear out, get in a pretty nice, albeit cooler Thursday, especially compared to today. Then again, gets this trough going, mixing with that lake moisture and the two areas of energy combining. And the European, of course, would really have us getting some nice QPF here, and possibly some of that being some wet snowfall. And it really tries to keep that energy onshore as opposed to the GFS slamming everything south and east offshore. So it keeps us in that precipitation zone into Saturday a little bit before spinning up this coastal storm, which again, for our interest, stays too far to the east to really affect us Saturday night into Sunday. And you can also see the Euro and the NAM and GFS a little bit. I've been trying to kick up some lake effect there off of Ontario if that flow can back around in the north and northwest enough, depending on how that coastal system aligns. And maybe even that moisture and snow flurry activity gets into northern Pennsylvania Saturday into Sunday, depending on how strong and where that coastal storm is located. But then even the Euro pushes that system away, keeps us really cold on Sunday even, with that trough still in pretty good place and that storm really dragging down cold air on its backside. But then even the Euro gets more optimistic come early next week, improving conditions, clearing skies, and maybe even keeping us dry through Wednesday and beyond. So the strength of that front coming through mid-next week is in question if it can make its way here. And of course the European just wants to kind of kill that front off, and all that energy gets absorbed into the southern stream system, which then maybe eventually could scoot south and then along the coast.
Jase, do you want to show them the, I think there's a 700 millibar relative humidity plot under operational ECMWO.
Or you can look at the GFS since that's more.
Maybe not this person.
Temperature. NAM might have it.
Just curious to see where the dry air sets up to our west.
Yeah, we don't seem to have that.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah. We can look at some interesting things like the 850 anomalies, explaining why it's so high. You can see in this first NAM image here, roughly what's going on today, that huge swath of plus 10 Celsius over normal. Good explanation for why it's so warm here. You can see that warm upper level air is quickly getting displaced. And it takes some time, so Wednesday won't be too bad. It takes some time for that really cold air to sink in. But then Thursday, anomalously cold air sets in. And then we potentially get that next shot of that super cold air Friday into Saturday, and then that's what drives the strengthening storm system. It gives us this shot of a few snowflakes mixing in, although the NAM is maybe a little less bullish with some of our precipitation here. And then maybe the other interesting thing to look at is if we look at the latest 500 millibar vorticity from the GFS, it just reinforces its notion and thinking, at least from this run, that that vortmax there really slides really far south here into the Carolinas come Saturday, displacing a lot of that energy and precipitation maybe too far south for us, and then deepens that trough to the east so that that storm system really blows up well offshore and really misses us. Also, it's off too far offshore to get that maybe lake effect and super cold northwest flow on the backside. So certainly some model disagreement coming through, but looking at the setup, it's obviously going to get cold here Friday night into Saturday, lots of clouds around, showers of assorted rain and snow variety. Really in the valley location, the only worry about the accumulation, then improving conditions come Sunday and early next week. I'd be interested in hearing any other thoughts and opinions on the setup the rest of this week and next week. Thanks.
Questions and comments for Jase? Come over to Mike. Is that all that we got?
It's just
It's just tangled.
Good summary for the year so far. It's an interesting weather pattern where we get a little bit of everything and keeps it interesting, and you don't get locked into 6 months of heat or cold.
Other questions or comments?
Yeah, nice work, Jase. The GFS has been following about 2 time steps behind the trend of the European, by the way. So it was the European that initially, over the weekend, spun up this ridiculous coastal and then backed off, and then Monday, it had a much farther south, deeper trough, which is kind of 2 days later, which is where the GFS is. So I think I would hang my hat on whatever the European trend is and just realize the GFS is the tail that's being wagged by the head of the European. The other thing to note is, by the way, when cold air comes in, especially if we can get some low-level cold air in behind this disturbance, it takes its sweet time getting out of here. So I would be hesitant to say it's going to get warmer on Sunday, because actually Sunday could be, in some places in eastern Pennsylvania, the first hard freeze of the year, and the morning temperatures will be in the 20s perhaps in some places, and it'll take a while to break through that inversion.
Yeah, if you don't mind coming over, we don't have much cord length.
It was my understanding that the energy associated with former Hurricane Ana will be fully sampled with the 0Z runs tonight. What changes can we expect with the model runs when that energy is fully sampled?
Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't really considered that. Yeah, it's interesting. You'd hope it bring a little more consensus together, since, as Paul is saying, the GFS and Euro have been flip-flopping and GFS following around. But I am still a little, and maybe that will give us a little more insight into this, but I still just am a little leery of how potent and robust the Euro is trying to be with this storm system and potential coastal storm here. But maybe if we're getting that energy in, then that helps explain why this is actually a valid thought for what's going to happen. But obviously, the Euro is the gold standard here, but it does seem to sometimes blow things up and deepen these troughs just a tad. So perhaps that's just an explanation to not totally 100% jump on board with the Euro when we still are five-ish days out from this, 4 or 5 days. It's not very short term yet.
I just have one comment. 3 years ago, almost to the day, some of you might remember there was an October snowstorm. I was not here yet. I was at home. I live in New Hampshire, but we had 8 inches of snow and lost power for like 5 days. But anyway, with that storm, it was, I don't know if there's a correlation or not, the European that picked up on it first and amped it up, and there ended up being over 30 inches of snow in parts of New England. And I don't know if that's where this is headed. I don't think so, but it's interesting that the European's more amped than the GFS on this one.
Yeah, history's certainly there. I mean, Sandy, I believe the Euro was the first, around this general time of year, the Euro was the first one to really pick on it, blowing up and everything and throwing snow back. I'm not sure off the top of my head, but maybe it was 2011 was a little more cold air around in the preceding time period. It does seem, with all this really warm air we've had around and the lack of really cold nights in a lot of places, maybe it's a little harder to get accumulating snow with the ground still being pretty warm here.
So 2001, right around this time, we had Sandy. Or no, we had Snowmageddon. Then 2012, we have Sandy. I don't know what we had in 2013, but it just seems like recently Halloween just seems to be a prime target for bad weather. Yeah. Yeah. Just seems like Halloween the last few days is just, the last few years have just been a target of bad weather, whether it's rain or snow.
Well, if you look at climatology of these coastal storms, people forget that it's very fair game here in October, November to get plenty of East Coast winter storm, nor'easters, whatever you want to call them. So it's certainly climatologically not out of the question to get these this time of year. And then it just becomes a question of if enough cold air down and cold land surface to get any sort of major accumulation.
Yeah, I mean, my comment to that would be is just think of the sun angle, think about how much radiational warming you have during the day, and think about what the jet stream is doing this time of year. I mean, it is kind of everything coming together at the same time every year. It's not totally unexpected, as you're saying, based on climatology of coastal storms. And, I'm not a forecaster of 10, 20 years experience, but at least in the 7, 8 or so years that I have looked at European trends versus the GFS, the European always does seem to have more amplified patterns. Sometimes they end up being right, sometimes they end up being wrong. So take it for what it's worth.
Certainly, as we all know, overhyping situation currently is not the prudent way to go as a responsible forecaster. Certainly putting the message out there that there could be a few snowflakes and maybe a higher elevation accumulation if things break right is not unreasonable, I don't think.
Yeah, and watch the GFS ensembles. There's a nice link on the eWall page that Fred provides that shows you the Eastern U.S., each ensemble member that we can get without blowing up the computer system. But you can see differences in different GFS members, and some of them do, at times, agree with the European if you watch them long enough. So, just because the GFS operational doesn't have it, doesn't mean an ensemble member won't.
Here we can look on this site and see that at the spaghetti and see Saturday there is a lot of uncertainty, and there's certainly a camp of GFS members and bringing the trough a little further north and more like the European.
Right.
So tons of uncertainty, obviously, exactly how the dynamics play out.
Anything else? We're at 1 o'clock, so we'll wrap things up if there's no other comments, questions. Next week, Dan DePodwin from AccuWeather will be here. Maybe we'll have a summary of what happened in the weekend. I mean, I think the bottom line is even if we don't see much here in Pennsylvania, someone is probably going to get whacked by this storm in New England. So come check it out next week. Thanks again to Jase. We need to get you guys wire school.
I know. No, I'm going to teach them. I'm going to teach them the over-under.
Okay.
This is what we're going to do right now.
Teach them how. Very nice.
Yeah.
Look at this.
There are special places has to go where so it doesn't, I don't put it back.
It's interesting to see that in the beam.
I am going to tie it just so it doesn't get tangled with anything else. Another one you want me to do? I find this very thoroughly.
Oh, yeah. Right there.
Yeah, that's issues with over. Really interesting. Look at normalized aggregation.
I mean, it's not therapeutic anymore.
So I guess that's the difference. It's like their eyebrows. This is their ensemble. I'm guessing. Someone else is.
I'm sure Tyler is one. I'm sure. Like, you can't tell me that he was not lying.
But everybody that joined the left had 3 minutes of
Okay, then maybe he wasn't. Okay, because I was the one that was there the entire time.
Yeah.
Because I copied the link.
Yeah,
So it was in the background playing. So
That
I was the one.
yeah, I knew that you were the one that was actually there. For about 90% of it is going on.
Good.
People did not seem to enjoy it. Because they all left within like 2 minutes. Yeah. Yeah. Right.
It's bad though when there's somebody who can do it really fast and they just switch through it.
Yeah. Yeah. Like,
I'm trying to remember what our peak was last. When Tyler was actually here, not a year.
you say you
Yeah.
know,
When Tyler didn't have Hey, I didn't get any angry this semester.
Yeah.
No, last week I got one. Maybe the other one's too far. Anyway, you should just chill.
I did it as best as I could.
That's a good question. Okay. Right.
That was
I caught myself on the doing days that you should get band camp.
I want to go to radiation office.
Okay, I'll tell you everything.
Yeah.
Hello.
Oh, great. Yeah, I enjoyed the movie. Yeah, well, it has 1032 high, it better be progressive. I mean, my lord.
I think my
That
parents
drive
line up.
drive out there, yeah, they don't lose anything else. But it is slow. I mean, it's a bit
My mom hasn't even seen the weather center.
It's very amplified. You get to see it and go, yeah. Well, it's scary. Scary stuff. Although we're here with that amplified. And it's hard to. Oh, yeah, here, 5 days. Where you are. Are you? I'm Friday night for Sunday evening. Oh, it could be disastrous. I don't know. I'm happy it was just what's. I mean, the sunny. I guess it is November. Right. Well, I got burned. I was the only guest last time this happened. And I didn't get burned. And at least that's what happened. Because I'm used to free agents. Right. And that's the thing. I didn't realize West Virginia was the right. Yeah. Which game was that? That was the last. Well, it's on this one. Yeah, because was the last. No, Illinois, that was the last game. Then the next week, Nebraska. Right. But that was 2012. That's the October. Oh, right. Yeah. Oh, thanks. Yeah, thanks, Jase. Oh, yeah. You know, sure that something come up that's already. No worries. Definitely next thing. Yeah, well, that's the thing. Right now, I am fairly flexible, and especially because like I'm an early away, and most of my work done in the morning, you guys are focused on podcasting the rest of the day. Yeah, I'm like going to get wish there was a magic formula. I really do, but you know, I would hope 2016 would be yes, like summer 2016. Great. But I don't know. It depends on if they ask me to teach, like a TA or anything. I mean, I don't know. Let's see. Yeah, well, they will definitely go back to it. Yeah, I mean, before it was in it, but we need to. Yeah. Teaching geography. Yeah, it's all. Oh, nice. Yeah, it's been fun. Yeah. You guys get anything your own? Yeah. Yeah, you know, I mean, it was never really forced. Plus, it is a fairly good course. No, it's Yeah, I mean, you teach whatever.
Teaching us why we're not going to Canada. Yes. We're not going to Canada? Yeah.
Why would you
Brian's
go
gonna
to
show
Canada?
us.
It's Canada. Canada sucks.
Oh, I want to go to Canada.
Nobody likes Canada.
Okay, I really wanted to go through Toledo.
Their
but-
flag hasn't. That's the. I think that's
Do we get to go through Toledo?
I think that was the best way.
Yes.
I'll show you.
Because that's called my neck of the woods.
There. I'll bring this in there and show you.
What about Harry? Started a grad student.
I don't know.
You call it, you pick it.
I had to.
Yeah, it's been windy also. Yep. No, it'll be wrong.
They're gonna start all over again.
What, like refilm the whole thing?
Oh, no.
Alright, can we do it on a computer that's not this one?
Why does this computer never work?
Because it's this computer, that's why. Alright, stop that. I'll do it on my own.